my angels, it's Hailey, Reese, and Merry Christmas Eve. I am so excited to be spending Christmas Eve with you guys, but I'm even more excited to be bringing you guys a real life case of 5 missing children that occurred on Christmas Eve. I cannot believe that we have already reached Christmas Eve. I feel like we started Reesemas just yesterday, but I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you who have shared the past 24 days with me. I am so eternally grateful for each and every one of you, and you have made this holiday season the absolute best. For today's video though, we are going to be diving into the disappearance of the Sodder children, and this case is very frustrating, it's confusing, and it's completely unsolved. If at any point throughout the video you guys have any theories of your own, make sure to go ahead and drop some comments down below and let me know, because this case frustrates me for so many different reasons. So without further ado, let's just get right on into it. So on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1945, at around 1 a.m., a fire consumed a family's home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. This was the home of the Sodder family. George and Jenny Sodder and 9 out of their 10 children were inside the home when the fire broke out. George and Jenny Sodder, along with 4 of their children, made it out of the home, while 5 of them remained inside. George and Jenny Sodder, along with 4 of their children, made it out right away. 2-year-old Sylvia, 16-year-old George Jr., 17-year-old Marion, and 23-year-old John were the 4 children that made it out of that home safely. 5-year-old Betty, 8-year-old Jenny, 9-year-old Louis, 12-year-old Martha, and 14-year-old Maurice did not. A frantic George began trying to figure out what he could do to save his children, so he broke a window and ran into the home trying to find out how he could save his children. It was completely consumed with smoke. He could barely find his way through the home, and that was when he realized the staircase leading to upstairs, where those 5 children shared 2 bedrooms, was completely covered in flames. So he ran outside to grab his ladder in order to be able to climb up the side of the house and get inside to save his children. When he realized that his ladder, which had always been in the same spot, was no longer there. So he then came up with the idea to run to his car and pull his truck up to the house to climb on top of his truck to try to get inside the house. His truck would not start. All the while, one of his daughters ran to a neighbor's home in order to get help. Now, when the neighbors tried to call for the fire department, they could not reach an operator. So they ran to another neighbor's home who also could not get through to the fire department. This neighbor decided to actually drive to the fire department in order to get them over to the home. Now, what's really strange about this is that even though the fire department was only 2.5 miles from the Sodder family home, it took them until 8 a.m. to reach the home, when the fire had started at 1 a.m. which is just so wild to me. Once they arrived, the house was nothing but ashes, and it had burned completely down to the ground. Amongst these ashes, there was no sign of the 5 missing Sodder children. The fire chief declared that the fire must have cremated the children, therefore there was no sign of them, and declared all 5 of the children dead, even issuing them death certificates. The cause of the fire was later deemed due to bad wiring. All that remained of the Sodder family home was little pieces of the basement, and they would go ahead and build a memorial garden on top of this for their 5 children. Here's where things really get creepy, in my personal opinion. Typically, in the case of a fire, even if individuals were burned inside the home or wherever the fire may take place, bone fragments typically remain. Another really strange thing about this was that the fire was deemed due to bad wiring, but George had just recently had their wiring checked by the power company, and they had said everything was perfect. Shortly after George and Jenny's children were declared dead, they began questioning the circumstances surrounding what occurred that Christmas Eve, and started to think that maybe their kids were never within the home, and maybe they were actually kidnapped. Upon examining the time leading up to this fire, there were a ton of suspicious circumstances and suspicious happenings. One of which having to do with a life insurance salesman who tried to sell a new life insurance plan to George. Now, while he began trying to make this life insurance sale, he realized that George was not having it, and that's when he began to become super infuriated. He started yelling at George, his entire demeanor shifted, and then he even went as far as to say, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke. and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini. So who was Mussolini and why was he going to be paid for such remarks? Well, George Sodder was actually an Italian immigrant who never shared why he had immigrated. Within the Sodders community, there was a small Italian community that really stuck together but also shared a lot of the same opinions. George Sodder, however, voiced some unpopular opinions about the Italian dictator / prime minister, Mussolini. George's opinions kind of went against the Italian government, and that made him unfavorable within that community. Now, one of their surviving sons would talk about the fact that leading up to this fire, he had noticed a suspicious man watching the Sodder children. Even stranger and spookier, on the night of the fire, Jenny had been woken up at around 12:30 a.m. to the phone ringing, answering the phone to an unknown caller who sounded like she was at some sort of a Christmas Eve party. The caller asked for somebody that didn't live within the home. Before going to bed though, Jenny recognized and realized that the downstairs lights in the home had been on and the front door was unlocked. She assumed all of her children were in bed and that everything was okay, and she went back to bed. But when the house would later burn down, during the fire, witnesses said that lights were on within the home while it was on fire, which really doesn't go in line with the story of faulty wiring. Reports also surfaced of a man who was tampering with people's cars, so many believed perhaps that may have been a reason why George's car didn't start. Nobody really knows though, where did his ladder go? Around this time, the Sodder family believed they had enough evidence in order to prove that perhaps their children truly were kidnapped. Jenny Sodder began experimenting with different types of animal bones, seeing how they would burn if they had been in a fire, and each time she did so, there was some sort of bone fragment left behind. After her findings in this, she spoke to an employee who works in the cremating business who told her that even when bodies are intentionally cremated, bone fragment is left behind. So how did not one of her 5 children leave even the slightest bit of bone fragment in the ashes? To even further the family's suspicion, a woman claimed that on the night of the fire, she had seen the 5 Sodder children that would wind up missing inside of somebody's car while the fire was occurring. A woman at a tourist court claimed to actually see the children and to have served them breakfast, also saying that there was a car in the parking lot with a Florida license plate. A woman in a hotel in Charleston claimed to have seen 4 of the 5 children, and the reason that she recognized them being because she'd seen their pictures in the paper. She said that these children were with 2 men and 2 women who were of Italian extraction. There would be so many reports of seeing the missing Sodder children. And a few years later, George Sodder would see what appeared to be an image of one of his missing daughters within the paper from a school in New York. He went all the way to New York to see if it was in fact one of his missing children. However, the family of that girl refused to speak to or see him. In 1947, a desperate George and Jenny would reach out to the FBI and beg for their assistance. The FBI was willing to help, but the Fayetteville Police and Fire declined their offer to assist, which I found also super suspicious. Here's where things get even creepier, but also even more corrupt. Private investigator determined the member of the coroner's jury who determined the fire was an accident and nothing more than faulty wiring was in fact the same man who attempted to sell George the life insurance, which would make him the same man who foresaw this entire fire and got angry at George for not wanting to buy his life insurance policy. There would be so many tips submitted that led to absolutely nothing. So many sightings of these children that also led to absolutely nothing. Some people believed perhaps the children really did die in the fire. Others believed they were kidnapped, while some even thought there was mafia involvement. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny checked the mail with no return address that was addressed just to her, not to the family, just to Jenny. Inside, there was a photograph of a man who appeared to be in his mid-20s and looked eerily similar to their son Louis, who had been lost in the fire at the age of 9. On the back of this picture read, "I love Brother Frankie, Lil Boys, A90132 or 35. The letter was postmarked from Kentucky. The family hired a private investigator to head to Kentucky to track down who had sent that letter or to track down their son. However, that private investigator was never heard from again. There would be countless sightings and countless tips, all of which would lead to nothing. And unfortunately, in 1969, George Sodder would pass away, and in 1989, Jenny Sodder would pass away, neither of which ever knowing what truly happened to their children and never getting any justice for what occurred. There are so many people that believe that this was a way to get back at George Sodder, that maybe they'd used the ladder, went inside, took the children, and then started the fire, that maybe the children were taken way earlier in the night than anybody even thought. Regardless, it really screams foul play in every aspect, and a lot of people actually believe that this may have been an inside job. Why did it take the fire department 7 hours to go 2.5 miles? Why were the police so quick to just deem it an accident and say that the kids must have been cremated? Why did they decline the opportunity to work with the FBI? There's so many things about this case that scream a corrupt system. There are so many things about this case that scream so much more than faulty wiring, but we will probably never know what really happened to the Sodder family children that Christmas Eve. What do you guys think of this case? Please, please, please drop your comments down below and let me know. I know this case is so confusing and so frustrating and makes you think a million different things, but I want to hear what you guys think, so make sure to let me know. And that is it for today's video. Merry Christmas Eve, you guys. I hope that you have the most fabulous night, whatever it is you may be doing. If you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed but you do enjoy my videos, please, please, please hit that subscribe button, and also please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until tomorrow on Christmas Day, I love you guys.